what's really striking to me is that there is I think what we can be described as a general, um, the general collective intellectual development of Muslims is extremely disappointing. The response, the fact that Peterson's message has something like 1.4 million views, with the responses posted by Muslims being what they are, it's very indicative of our general intellectual condition. Yes, there are exceptions here and there, but is it really coincidence that the major the major critics of colonialism are not Muslim? Edward Said is not Muslim. Frank Fanon is not Muslim. Muslim, even those who are Muslim, like Samir Amin, who was born a Muslim, but as a critic of colonialism, he came at it from a Marxist perspective and not a Muslim perspective. In fact, Samir Amin is just not a Muslim. You know, by the time he's done, he wasn't a Muslim at all. It had nothing to do with Islam. Um, the other thing is that people don't realize that there is nothing new here. This is all so boringly repetitive, and entirely predictable. And if people had an education, they would realize how repetitive. Peterson's engagement with Hamza Yusuf is typical, classic, the classic dynamic of apologists for colonialism choosing pseudo Muslim intellectuals, and they always pick them precisely as that fellow
Whirleman.
Werleman described it. Those who try to pretend to pose as intellectuals speak how they think intellectuals sound like. And that just doesn't describe Peterson, but it describes Hamza Yusuf himself. Um, so I'll give you an example. There is a very famous philosopher of natural law called Robert George at Princeton. Very, very prominent philosopher of natural law, very conservative. I know that when Robert George wanted to pick a Muslim to engage about natural law, he refused to engage any Muslim with serious academic intellectuals and chose to engage Hamza Yusuf because of the repeated colonial dynamic of the apologists for colonizers always pick native informants that are vastly inferior to them and go through the pretense of a discourse and discussion and go through the pretense of actually respecting what the colonized has to say or what they tag as the colonized voice, which it's ironic that they often also pick someone like Hamza Yusuf as a white convert who's also part of the whole privilege of whiteness. And what Peterson ends up saying is a very natural product of his conversation with Hamza Yusuf. Hamza Yusuf himself, student of Bin Bayya, is part of blessing the Abraham Accords. And what are the Abraham Accords? The Abraham Accords are a single Muslim, Christians, and Jews coming together to get along. That sounds wonderful. However, it is Muslims who have to learn to get along with one another. It is Muslims who have to learn to get along with Christians. It is Muslims who have to learn to get along with Jews. Does the Abraham Accords impose any reciprocal duties? So, for instance, does it demand that Israel work on its racism? Absolutely not. Nothing in the Abraham Accords even acknowledged the widespread racism that exists in Israeli academic curriculum against Arabs and against Muslims. Does the Abraham Accords counsel any pushback on Islamophobia in the West or in Israel? Absolutely not. All of that is protected by freedom of speech. It is Muslims who have to learn how to modify their speech and even modify their school curriculums vis-a-vis Christians and Jews. Does the Abraham Accords include acknowledging the legacy of colonialism, settler colonialism? Absolutely not. Does the Abraham Accords include any responsibility for the United States or the rest of the West for the amount of violence heaped upon Iraq or Afghanistan? Absolutely not. Does it even include any discourse on reparations for Afghanistan or Iraq? Absolutely not. Does the Abraham Accords include anything about Muslim rights in Jerusalem? Absolutely not. Does the Abraham Accords include anything about the stealing of Palestinian lands and the disposition of Palestinians and the right of return of 5 million Palestinians who are refugees? Absolutely not. So when you have Peterson engaging a Muslim who is oblivious to Muslim suffering, a Muslim who is publicly bought by a government like the Emirati government, him and his teacher. And then Petersons go through these motions by throwing you idiotic lip service. Basically, he knows that he can get Muslims to start cheering for him by saying some stuff about homosexuals and about, a few things about conservative values and a few things about Satan and the influence of Satan. But does Peterson acknowledge how satanic it is what colonialism has done to native cultures across the globe? No, Satan is not involved in that. Does Peterson acknowledge that the racism in France vis-a-vis Arabs and Turks is satanic? Absolutely not. That's not satanic at all. Does Peterson acknowledge that Islamophobia and what Daniel Pipes has done and Robert Spencer and continue to do is satanic? Absolutely not. So Peterson is happy to talk to Muslims about avoiding Satan, but Satan seems to only be interested to tell Muslims, be nice to Jews and Christians and roll over when Jews and Christians want to deny you your rights.